Hey guys, how's it going? Kripp here. Today I want to just have a little bit of a discussion on a very interesting thing that I realized that I haven't really seen other people talk about. So it has to do with kind of a lot of the different methods that a lot of different people have thought up to counter Zoo. Now, the interesting thing is that, Blizzard tried, from our understanding, to really push the control aspect of the game through the Whispers of the Old God expansion, and what ended up happening is nobody's really playing control decks. It's all about aggro, zoo, and decks that deliberately counter those, but you couldn't really consider those as control decks, really. There's almost no control play whatsoever, and it seems like just pushing on the board as fast as possible seems to be the end-all, be-all of Hearthstone. So there's a lot of different things that people have suggested would counter this, but generally, a lot of the cards that people suggest to counter aggro are just really good in aggro decks. So, we took a look at a card like Muster for Battle. In Arena, it's generally used to counter aggressive openers, but if you have a good 1-drop and 2-drop and then you play Muster for Battle, you have the aggro opener. So even cards like Zombie Chow, which was one of the best design cards ever because it's a ridiculous card for board control in the early state, but it's very bad in the late game. Really, some aggressive decks were still using Zombie Chow. So it's come to a state where it's very difficult to actually have cards that counter Zoo without Zoo actually using them and becoming more powerful as a result. So I've thought about this. A lot of people have thought about this. I thought about making a minion that is like immune to damage or something. There's a lot of different things that I've come up with. Never really felt great about any of my ideas, and I really actually came up with a very interesting thing yesterday that I wanted to share. And a little bit of backstory, I have played Magic the Gathering for, the greater part, more than a decade, let's say. Just off and on. I don't really play anymore. Hearthstone, in my opinion, is just a straight up better game, at least on a playability level. But Magic the Gathering has basically fed almost every single other card game with the core mechanics. If you take a look at a lot of things that are in Hearthstone, they really do exist first in Magic the Gathering. Like, things like charge, things like... There's just a lot of those keyword abilities are from Magic the Gathering and similar card games. And similar card games kind of, lead into this as well. A lot of the keywords, in fact, probably all of them, exist in some form or another. Now, one of the very core, one of the base, kind of keywords that existed in Magic the Gathering that has not led into Hearthstone and has not led, from my knowledge, into almost any other card game that I've played so far is First Strike. And thinking about this, I'll explain what it is in a moment. It seems like the best, the absolute cleanest way to deal with aggressive small minions in the game right now. So, what is First Strike? One of my favorite cards in Magic the Gathering, because I like to play a lot of white weenie decks, is of course the White Knight. This is the White Knight here. He's kind of just a small little minion there. But what is important is the First Strike ability. So First Strike in Magic the Gathering says, this creature deals combat damage before creatures without First Strike. So what that translates to, if First Strike existed in Hearthstone, if I had a 2/2 guy, and you had a 2/2 guy, my 2/2 guy would kill your 2/2 guy, and it would not take any damage back. Now, if I had a 2/2 guy, and you had a 2/3 guy, well, yeah, they would both take damage, and it would be as if my guy didn't have First Strike. So it's kind of a mechanic that griefs minions that are slightly smaller than those who have First Strike. And I thought, if Hearthstone actually had guys with First Strike, that would actually deal with a lot of the Zooey minions. And yes, understandably, Zoo decks will also use the minions that have First Strike because they're very advantageous in cleaning up the board state. But if you put First Strike on mid to late game like taunt minions, because as a control deck, you can afford to run creature removal. As an aggressive zoo deck, you generally cannot. It would make it so the control decks and the mid-range decks would have very powerful answers to, a large amount of small minions, while the decks that play a lot of those small minions wouldn't necessarily have a great answer that would also let them win in other cases. So it's a situation where I feel if there was a first strike-like mechanic in Hearthstone, it would actually be a solution to a lot of the aggressive decks. It wouldn't have to be like too crazy of a card, just a card that like machine guns down like, 2/2 guys or like, 1/1 guys. Just kill them all as fast as possible. Basically, we need that. And I think through like a simple keyword like this, since we've kind of only received weak upgrades to the mechanics in Hearthstone throughout the expansions, that, I think there's actually some chance that we'll see this, because you have to keep in mind a lot of the Hearthstone development team, they have played a lot of the other card games, and if they played a lot of the other card games, they've definitely played Magic the Gathering. They've definitely considered a lot of the different aspects in the game, and I'm sure they've had this discussion already. And I'm sure now that they've realized that Whispers of the Old Gods wasn't able to push out a control meta or even anything close to it, that they're going to look at other options, and really, we might actually see a similar mechanic in the next few expansions. So it's a pretty interesting thing, and it's something that I'd really like to see in Hearthstone, because one thing that I think just doesn't exist well enough in the game is answers to Zoo. Zoo is just like really out of control. Zoo is just so good. It's so consistent. You can clear out a Zoo deck, but with all the death rattle stuff, with all the recovery, with all the bursts that all the Zoo decks still have, even if you clear them, you can still lose. And to clear them is a very unlikely thing, because like a Zoo deck is going to have a good opener like 90% of the time. But if your class only has one decent board clear, you have to draw that exact card, and you only have 2 in your deck. So even though you can try to counter a Zoo deck, you're going to find that there's going to be a large level of inconsistency on your end against even the class you're deliberately trying to counter. Now, if you change this around, if you come up with a very specific and very good control deck, you can make a different control deck that very easily beats the other control deck. But this just seems to not be a dynamic between the other archetypes. The way that you beat a Zoo deck is by playing a different type of Zoo deck and basically flipping a coin. You can play like some kind of combo decks, but those are actually the decks that repeatedly get nerfed in Hearthstone, so they don't stick around very long, and it seems like, whenever there's no dominant combo deck out there, Zoo just comes back and dominates the game. So I think we need a little bit of a different solution, and I think this is one that, I would appreciate. And I thought I'd share my thoughts with you guys, get the discussion going, so you guys can maybe come up with some other cool solutions. And who knows, maybe we'll have a different game in a few months. So I hope you guys enjoy my thoughts, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.